alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to A Live After Reading. I'm your recovering host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a guest of the podcast who I think he's in better health than me currently. Rich Davis, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tim, thanks for having me, man, and I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, it was a rough week, but let's not linger on that. So, Rich, you are a comic book writer and possibly other things that we haven't talked that much in advance, so tell us a little bit about yourself and the sort of things you create.
Yeah, so I am the writer and creator of Cult of Dracula and now Rise of Dracula from Source Point Press. Cult of Dracula, all 6 issues are in the can and are in comic book stores all over the world. And Rise of Dracula issue 2 comes out next Wednesday. So it's these are 2 volumes of an eventual 4-volume Dracula saga. That's going to be released by Source Point Press, and I've got several other comic books coming down the pike, and some of them have already been announced, like my Frankenstein story has already been announced, and then some are, I guess, top secret. I can't really talk about them right now.
That happens, I suppose, especially when you're working with teams like with comics, right? I mean, I saw
it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there are certain publishers that when you work with them, they're very controlling over how they disseminate information. And if you jump the gun on something and spoil their marketing plan, they don't like that very much.
To put it lightly.
Yeah, so if I become Tom Holland and spill all the beans, I would get a really nasty call from my publicist Lori. She's like, "You're gonna get fired." So Lori Sorensen is direct with Source Point, and she's amazing. So she handles all my convention appearances and things. And then of course, you and I both know Mickey, so he sets up things like this podcast and all that great stuff. So it's pretty wild. It's cool to have a publicity team that looks out for me. So yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah, I wonder what that's like. I'm an indie author, so so what I do, my publicity consists of me, just like every other part of my team, basically.
So did mine in the beginning, man. Like I had to, pound that proverbial virtual pavement, to get noticed and to get my book in front of folks at Source Point Press, and I made a lot of promises and that I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep, and thankfully I was able to follow through on those.
Wow, it sounds like your your risks have paid off, I guess. Then
So far they have. I mean, Cult of Dracula came out in 2021, and it was a top 50 comic of the year, and this is my first book, so that was pretty impressive. And now Rise of Dracula is out, and it is selling exceptionally well. I think Rise has more of a broad appeal to it. Cult was very focused and very small, very intimate. It's kind of like a Tobe Hooper film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Southern intimate setting following a core group of characters, but that's about it. But Rise of Dracula, it would be more like a John Carpenter film. It's a dystopian near future, and it explores the fragility of democracy and the threat of fascism. So it's been a fun story to tell, and it's been a very poignant story to tell. When I started conceiving the idea, the world wasn't as polarized and scary as it is, now that I've actually started writing it. So maybe sometimes feel a little bit like Nostradamus there, like maybe the things I was writing have come to pass.
Oh, yeah, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, I write some really disturbed things in my book, and I don't want them to come true.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I write mostly fantasy these days, but I do have a bunch of science fiction, some of which is even set on Earth in the future, and it is... I mean, my stuff is pretty weird though, so I've never really considered it as like this is possible, this could happen. I'm like, I don't really think it's going to happen this way.
Science fiction writers have this just innate ability to sense where the world is going. I mean, you go all the way back to 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
Stanley Kubrick. When you first arrived at the space station, there's a guy sitting there. He's reading the newspaper on an iPad.
Yeah.
And, I mean, and this is in the late '60s, early '70s for 2001.
I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it was pretty early. I think it's post the original series of Star Trek and pre Next Generation, so somewhere in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's at the latest, it would be a early '70s film.
I think. Oh, maybe I'm wrong then, and maybe it is actually about the same time as the original Star Trek series.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's probably like 70, 71, maybe.
The effects in that movie, and the effects and composition in that movie are pretty amazing, as well as some of the futurism. The issue, I don't need to get into my issues with 2001, but there are. It's just a matter of like it's a great. It looks great. It's a beautiful movie, but I kind of like having more story in my movie, more characters, that kind of thing. That's all I'd say about it.
It was 1968 actually when Space Odyssey hit. Yeah, it's a very long movie. And
Yes.
It's a difficult watch, but it is brilliant. It's one of Kubrick's masterpieces, and he's a hell of a filmmaker. So
I mean, I agree that it's a masterpiece of a movie. I especially like the climactic sequence of the movie, which I consider to be the part in the spaceship with Hal 9000. Yeah, I forget if it was. It's funny because I grew up in the '90s, and when there was this cartoon called Recess. Sorry, this is a bit of a digression, but there was this cartoon called Recess, which features kids on this dystopian playground, basically. And at one point, and many of the episodes are references to classic movies like that. And in one of them, they get the computer eye put into the school in various places. Mm-hmm. So they have and it's Sal 3000 or something. It's watching them. And it's a parody of that part of 2001. Anyway, but back to Dracula. I'm curious because I've heard of there's a lot of good, spin-offs of Dracula or Dracula concepts. I mean, I'm a fan of, what is it, Hellsing, the manga.
fantastic.
I love Hellsing. Or I'm a big manga nerd, by the way, lately.
Manga is definitely coming on strong. It's a
Yes.
beautiful medium that honestly I didn't know a lot about until recently, and I've been turned on to it lately, and I'm very much enjoying what I'm reading.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you want a scary future that's also probably pretty unlikely, my favorite manga is one of those. Blame.
I love that.
It's spelled exactly as I said it with an exclamation point at the end. It's from the 90s. Again, it's a 90s manga. But the guy who created it was like an architecture student. And it's set in it's cyberpunk. So it's set in this far future. It's like a weird dystopian city that seems to be everywhere you go. Like there's nothing else in the world.
Right.
And it seems to go on upward and outward forever. And it's just this journey through this place. And it's insanely bizarre. Let me put it that way. Definitely a very filmic story too, and that's what I was trying to get at here with the question I just can never seem to ask is how do you see a comic panel when you're writing?
Yeah, so I actually come from a screenwriting background myself. There was a time in my life when I thought I was going to be a playwright and a screenwriter. I owned a theater for many years. I was artistic director, produced more than 100 plays there, and I've worked in the film industry. I've done screenwriting, script doctor work, like helping people develop their scripts. Nothing that would ever make me famous, of course, but so when I write a comic book script, I look at it the same way as I'm writing a screenplay. I think screenplays and comic books have a great deal more in common than prose novels and comic books. Because when you're writing a screenplay or you're writing a comic book, they're both visual mediums, so you're writing in pictures. So, when I'm writing a comic script, the way I even break it down in the same format that I
Mm.
as a screenplay. So when I'm writing a screenplay, I am writing for my director of photography. I'm telling him what I see in my head so that he can make that appear on the camera. And when I'm writing a comic script, I'm writing for my artist. So I'm writing what I see in my head so that he can bring it to life on the panel. And that's probably the most interesting thing I've learned making the transition is there's really no quote unquote right way to write a script. There
Mm.
are for comics, there are just a lot of different ways. So if you talk to 10 creators, they would probably tell you 10 different ways that they write. This way works for me and it works for my artist, but certain people write it completely different.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense. It's collaboration too, so I imagine different combinations of people are going to approach the process differently as well.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to have a good relationship with your artist. At minimum, your artist, but also your colorist, your letterer. Writing a comic book and creating a comic book is a lot like creating a film because it takes
Mm.
the contributions of so many people to make it happen. So that's why I always, when I get all of the credit for the book, I feel a little bad about that because sometimes Queese, my artist, sometimes his work gets overlooked, and Alex, people rarely ever comment on the color, even though this book wouldn't be anything without Alex's color. And Dave Lentz, who does my lettering, I learned really quickly that a good letterer can change an entire book because they can help the reader hear the characters' voices in the way that you intended them, just by the way they shape the balloons and the way they lay them out on the page. So yeah, creating a comic's a lot like making a film. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of people to make it go.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. And even the it's kind of funny though. Most of the examples of comics I can think of were at least nominally done by one person, but like you said, there's almost always a team of some kind behind them.
Yeah.
I think the one I'm pretty sure is pretty much just one guy was Calvin and Hobbes, but that's not a comic book. That's a comic strip. It's a little different. Yeah.
Comic strip. A lot of comic strips are generally just one person. Comic books, rarely do you have a Todd McFarlane who writes and draws.
Yeah. Or even one where you do get someone who writes and draws, like the webcomic Schlock Mercenary by Howard Taylor. He drew the whole thing, and you can tell at the beginning he didn't really know how. but after 9 years or whatever of doing it, even he has, like, I think he got a colorist eventually, and he got an ink person. No, I think he does the inks, but he got somebody else to do the color. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a crazy amount of work too, because that's a daily comic.
I mean, it takes so much to bring 22 pages to life, or 24 pages. I mean, it's incredible the number of people who contribute, and editors get overlooked all the time,
Mm.
and they can make a huge difference in a book. You can tell a book that's had a good editor and a book that doesn't have a good editor. You can pick that up really quickly.
Oh, I hear that. I mean, I not to weigh too heavily on my experience as a novelist, but when I started out, publishing my own work, I I'd never seen an editor, basically. I mean, I was an English major and I'd done workshops and stuff, but that doesn't prepare you for what it's going to be like to produce a novel and have people actually read it who aren't other writers, basically.
Right.
And I gotta say, it's one of those. This is maybe too deep of a story, so I'm going to skip parts of it. But one of the things that struck me the most, because I've published books I've published older books. Like my oldest novel that I have published was written when I was 19.
Okay.
The original rough draft was when I was 19.
Wow.
And of course, it took a lot of edits.
Of course.
And it took years. I worked on that for about a decade before I published it, on and off. But one of the key things I noticed about it is it's actually about as good as anything I tried to publish the first year I was publishing, even though that was like, again, 8 years later.
Yeah.
It's probably better than a lot of that stuff, but that's because I was much more confident. And that's what I'm trying to get at here is the process of how does confidence and skill, how does that dynamic, how do those two things play in your work, I guess?
You know, confidence is a difficult thing. It's one of those either you have it or you don't. And there are a lot of very, very talented people out there that have none, and there are a
Hmm.
lot of confident people who have very little of the other. So, sometimes I feel like I suffer badly from imposter syndrome. I feel like I snuck into this party and I'm waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, dude, time to go." But it's because I have that natural confidence. I can talk to anybody. I can walk into a room, and I mean, I could be falling apart inside, but you'd think I was the most confident, cool, and collected person you've ever met. So for me, but the the negative side of that is sometimes I feel like I'm out over my skis or I'm reaching
Hmm.
a little too far, because I don't know, sometimes I have those doubts like everybody does, like, okay, now I've promised this, can I back it up? Because confidence only works if you can back it up, and if you can't, well, you're done. So, I don't know if I have talent. People enjoy my book. It's selling very, very well. But I always have those doubts. It's like, are they reading my book because it's good and they enjoy it, or are they reading my book because I'm just a really good salesman? I never know which is which,
Yeah.
and I tend to doubt myself a lot, and I think a lot of times that it's the latter, that I've just been a very good salesman. But then when the sales numbers and the reviews come in and people are really digging the book, it makes me feel a little bit better.
No, actually, I was very much the same way, and to some degree. I mean, I started writing fiction when I was 13. So, but I didn't publish until I was maybe 25, I think.
Right?
So, one of the things I noticed though is that at first I was very confident when I first started writing. I'm like, I know I'm not that good at this, but I'm enjoying it,
Hmm.
and that's all it took to get it done. Did you go through a phase like that with writing screenplays?
I put off becoming a writer for a very, very long time. I didn't think, I don't know, I never really thought I could pursue it as a career until probably my junior year of college is when I really started thinking about it. Um, so, um, so yeah, it's a very similar thing. I think for me, I think I was more cocksure when I was younger, and
Hmm.
now that's translated more into confidence, um, or at least the illusion of confidence.
Yeah, I didn't get confidence till well, a lot of things changed for me a few years ago, but most importantly, I learned how to really edit my own work.
Hmm.
Not as like an editor would, but my part of the editing.
Yeah.
Once I got that done, that down, I feel like my books stopped getting negative reviews to the extent that they used to. I mean, they still get those 1 stars, but you can never stop that. Those Amazon reviewers, you never know. There's like I've heard it said there's a guy out there who hates everything,
Oh
and
yeah.
some of us, and we're all going to meet that person on Amazon at some point if
Oh
it's
yeah.
while we're publishing.
There was a podcast out of the UK, and they hated Cult of Dracula. I mean,
Oh
they
wow.
hated everything about it. I don't think they had a single positive thing to say about it.
Oof.
And that was now, I was an actor for a long time as well.
Mm.
So I'm accustomed to constructive criticism. I'm accustomed to negative reviews. I mean, I've had play reviewers completely shred me before for a performance, and I'm used to it. But I got to tell you, after having essentially 6 8 months of just constant positive feedback about Cult of Dracula, when I heard that podcast, I mean, it crushed me.
Oh
Um,
really?
it
Hmm.
did, man. I mean, it was like, but I made myself listen to it, and the thing was, a lot of what they were saying, I could actually agree with. Like
Mm.
one of the biggest things that they said was, the story was a bit confusing as far as the timeline. And I realized, speaking of overconfidence, when I started writing Cult of Dracula, I was very much inspired
Hmm.
Kill Bill. Tarantino's an idol of mine, and in writing Cult of Dracula, I discovered how difficult it is to tell a story the way Quentin tells one, with this broken narrative. And so I wrote Cult of Dracula as a broken narrative, and on purpose, I wanted the timeline to be confusing because it's all about cults. And one of the first things a cult will do when you're being initiated is they will completely disconnect you from the outside world so that you are confused about where you are, when you are, all of these things. So I went into it with this, overly ambitious idea
Yeah.
that my readers would be initiates to the cult, and so I wanted them, as the story went further and further along, I wanted them to lose track of time. But looking back on it, that was a bit too ambitious, and if I could change one thing about the Cult of Dracula, I would have added more guideposts into the book, or I would have told a more linear story, which I am now doing in Rise of Dracula. Rise of Dracula essentially takes place within a very specific amount of time, and it's a story that moves forward in a way that's a lot easier for the audience to follow. So that's one of the reasons I think Rise of Dracula has a broader appeal to a larger audience.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And though I want to say, it does strike me that after getting a bunch of positive feedback, you took, one point really hit you because you agreed with so much of their criticism. That makes so much sense to me. I mean, at first I thought, like, really? I mean, you're gonna find that one turd in the ointment, but no. I mean, no, not to say it was bad. Maybe it's a fine podcast, but the one thing that you're gonna find that's gonna ruin your meal, you're gonna look at that because you can't look away.
And that's also a part of me. I'm very hypercritical of myself, so I tend to think, oh, the positive reviews, that's just somebody blowing smoke up my ass. But the negative review, that guy knows what he's talking about. So I tend to be a little. I'm very optimistic in a lot of ways about the world and everything else, but about myself, I'm very. I'm very hard on myself.
Oh well, I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe that's helpful, but it depends on your process, I suppose.
Yeah.
Uh,
I listen to feedback. Like when I get negative response, like I don't get defensive about it. And again, this comes from my career as an actor, because as an actor, you're used to, you go up on rehearsal, you perform, you run the show, and then afterwards the director, shreds you and tells you everything you fucked up on. And then you take that. It's not personal, but the director
yeah.
is telling you what to do to make the show better. So you take that feedback and that criticism and you process it and you change what you're doing the next day of rehearsal. So when I do hear negative reviews, I don't get defensive about them because it's just part of the creative process.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, what I was going to say about I mean, even if you run into that 1 star on Amazon, like the authors always talk about in my circles, it doesn't bother me much anymore, because usually if somebody is that bad of a reaction to one of my books, I know that I almost can't blame myself for that.
Right.
It's not like I put any, mostly because I'm like, either they got the book for the wrong reason, or they just wanted a different book. Nobody can give. I can't imagine somebody giving my books 1 star off of their merits. Maybe that's why. Maybe I'm overconfident. But when I look at one of my books, I'm like, it's pretty good. And if you don't like it that much, well, you're just not the right guy for it. Maybe you're the wrong person to read this book.
I think that's a symptom of our society today. Of when people only leave 5 star or 1 star reviews. Very rarely do you get anything in the middle. And I think it's Verizon's fault, because Verizon started these surveys with when you have their service, and they ask you to do it, and they tell you, if you love us or if you like this, please give us there's a customer service guy, give us a 5 star review.
Yeah.
Less than a 5 star is considered a failure. So we get this mentality that we have to either leave a 5 star review or a 1 star review, and that's just not the way it is. That's not even helpful, really, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
the one that's going to be helpful is the guy who gives you a 3, and says, yeah, it was kind of good, but it had all these flaws. Average is not failing. If you just
Yeah.
told, if you just told, or if I just told an average vampire story obviously I want to produce an above average or a great story, but
Mm-hmm.
getting being an average story that's on par with with Anne Rice or whoever's setting the trend for vampire stories. Yeah, I'm cool with that. But a lot of times reviews aren't, especially Amazon reviews, aren't really helpful because people
Mm-hmm.
will give it a 1 star because, oh, I didn't like the font he used. 1 star. And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it's funny. One of my favorite review. I actually have a favorite reviewer because I'm still pretty small. But this guy who weirdly I met him a long time ago on a forum, but eventually before I'd ever published anything, we were on a RPG forum, the same RPG forum, and he commented on one of my threads a bunch. But this was like a decade ago. Actually, I don't even want to say how long ago it was. It was not nice. But but he finally he sent, but he posted a review recently of one, and he's like, this guy's becoming one of my favorite authors, and guess how many stars it had? 4 stars. I'm like, you do realize that's bringing down my average, but I'm glad you were honest.
right. And I think that's helpful because what
Yeah.
you're saying is, because sometimes I think like a 5 star review, it should be, this was amazing. This was
Yeah.
the best of the best. That's what 5 stars should say, because if you're giving 5 stars to a book that's, yeah, I kind of enjoyed it, that's not helpful. Or if you're giving a 1 star to a book like, yeah, I kind of liked it, but I didn't like this, this, and this, give it a 3, give it a 4. Tell
Yes.
tell people what it really is or what you thought it was. Don't just go to this binary choice. The world is not binary. There's a lot of numbers in between.
Honesty counts, and if people can tell you put some thought into it, that's actually really, that almost says more about the book in a positive way or a negative way, depending on which way you're swinging here.
Right?
But if you're giving like a book a 4 star because you thought about it a bunch and you're like, well, I know this person can do better, is another way to that's saying. I know this creator can do a better job. This is not the perfect work. I'm looking for that from them, though. That's what that kind of review that I got there tells me. And that's really cool. It makes me feel like, oh, there's still work to do, which is good because I'm not that old yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, but I've got to say that when I see comics and like what you're talking about with the large team and all this, the acting and the comparisons to the directing and acting and stuff, man, it sounds intimidating. Do you have any advice for people who are getting into comics, comic book, or specifically writing them?
Finish your script.
Mm.
That's the best advice I can get. I had I won't say his name because he's kind of controversial right now, but he was very influential in helping me as a younger, newer writer. But he put it to me like this: 80% of the scripts that get started never get finished. So if you
Mm.
finish your script, you're already in the top 20% of every comic book script that's ever been written. And top 20th percentile, that's not a bad place to be. So finish your script. It's better than you think it is, but it's also not as good as you think it is. So be ready to edit it. So finishing what you start is the hardest thing to do,
Mm.
but it's the most important thing that you can do. And then the follow up to that would be to be open to constructive criticism, because if you bring a story to a publisher and and they come back and they're like, yeah, we like that, but this part's too long, we don't think that this B plot is really going to pan out, so why don't we move away from that? Or when they're telling you what they want, they're looking for a reason to publish it. Don't dig your heels in and fight for every little thing. Don't be afraid to kill your darlings, as my creative writing professor in college used to say. You've got to know the difference, when you got to know when to fight for something because it's important, it's integral to the story, and then you've got to got to know when to say, yeah, you know what, I see that. We don't really need this plot line. Like, this is a vampire story, so I don't really need to explore the origins of werewolves. And I don't need to discover why disco balls are now considered vampires. Twilight did there.
Yeah. So that's actually reminds me a lot of what is it? A couple of Heinlein's rules. You know, this Robert A. Heinlein, the sci-fi author. Because his rules for publishing were like, he had like 4 or 5 of them. I forget exactly how many because the version I've heard has like an addendum to the last one, so I get confused. But the first one is that you must write and you must finish. Those are the first 2, I think. And finishing is really important. Like, I mean, until I finished I finished my first novel again when I was about 13, and I mean, rough draft, but I never got to edit that book. It was a mess, and I was 13, so I didn't know anything about that sort of thing. 13-year-old autistic. Let's write a book. Okay, these characters make about as much sense as that implies. But hey, I still did it, and I'm glad I did it. And that book is kind of a keystone for me because it says I can do this.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that's all you need is just to be able to look at it and say, damn, I did this. I actually can do this. And that little bit of confidence can be what pushes you to sell it to a publisher. And then when you sell it to the publisher, you're like, wow, I really can do this. And so that achievement right there can be enough to push you forward to be able to sell it to the reading audience. So celebrate your victories and keep your defeats in context. Those are huge rules that will help you as you develop as a writer.
Absolutely. Rich Davis, remind us again what that book's called and where people can find it online.
Yeah, Rise of Dracula is in comic book stores now.
Ooh, okay.
It comes out on Wednesday. Cult of Dracula is completed, so you can buy the graphic novel in fine comic book stores all over the world. And you can also buy it on Amazon. It's Target, Barnes & Noble. It's everywhere. I do highly encourage, however, that you seek out a local comic book store nearby and purchase the book from them, because local comic book shops are the backbone and the heart of this industry, and without them, we don't exist.
I gotta say, yeah, and a lot of those stores also pack their share of games and stuff. So shout out to like my local comic book and game store, the Dork Den, and there's another one, the name I always forget that I like, but I forget the name because they kept changing it. Anyway,
The comic book store of many names.
yes, the unnamed comic book store, but no, it used to be. No, forget it. I'm not gonna dox myself, but definitely check out check out those books. That's awesome. Thanks so much for being on the show, Rich.
And thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been a blast. And as for this podcast, you can find more of us at mentalcellarpublications.com. And you can find my books on Amazon.com pretty much exclusively right now. But you can still find them on you can find all the books on timniederreiter.com. That's got the index of books. It's got all the covers. That's all like 15 covers, something like that. And you can also find the serials at timniederreiter.com/serialized-fiction. So thanks for listening, everybody. And stay safe out there. I'll see you next week, hopefully with a clearer throat. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.
That tears it.